Hello and welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish. Today is Tuesday, July 25th, 2023. And as always, we're gathered to do this work on the traditional and unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. Council, I'd like to move that we adopt an amended agenda to add two items. It'll be item 6 will now be discussion of the WLNG request for an appointment to the gender safety group. And I have a verbal update on that. And then item 7 will be a motion to close for legal or personnel reasons. And then that leaves item 8 will be termination. Could I have a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Pettingill. All in favor? Motion carries. Sorry, it was seconded by Councillor Pettingill. Okay. So our first order of business is the PlanH Healthy Public Policy Grant Application Memo. And we were going to do a presentation here. This is just simply for questions for our staff. Anyone want to kick us off with this or make a motion that would move us ahead in time if that's where we're headed? Go ahead, Councillor Henderson.
I did have a question, Mayor Herford. I wondered, the report to council, and I'll just quote from it, this advanced pilot project will help inform a larger upcoming district-led urban forest management strategy. I wonder if staff could advise as to the geographic scope that might be intended for that larger strategy. This pilot project is intended for a downtown geographic scope, but what is the intention for the larger strategy as regards what areas we take in, what neighborhoods we take in? Thank you.
Good morning. Through you, Mayor Herford. Councillor Anderson, it is intended for the whole community, so all of the District of Squamish. We have a bit of time to sort out the scope for that project, starting with this downtown study. But yeah, the intention is for all the neighborhoods of Squamish.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a logistical question, which might be through to finance. The intention is for this work to start in the fall. So I'm just wondering if this requires a budget amendment to include the new funding opportunity and spending.
Thank you for the question through the chair. No, it doesn't. It is a net neutral, so it's a flow-through grant, and it does not pre-commit the district to any financial commitments. So it is no amendment necessary.
Council, go ahead, Councillor French.
I'll move the staff recommendation if you're ready for that.
We've got a seconder, so I think we're ready. Would you like to speak to it anyway?
Sure. Briefly, I think that anytime we can submit a grant for this amount of money or greater, we should jump all over it. I know of many downtown residents who would welcome the opportunity for increasing the tree population downtown.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So next we have the 2024-2028 financial plan capital projects presentation. We'll give our finance team a second to get set up there. Okay, Ms. Glende is going to get us started and then pass to staff from there.
Thank you, Mayor Herford, and good morning, council and community members. We're pleased to be before you to kick off the, or I guess we've already had a kickoff meeting, but to present to you the initial component of our 2024-2028 financial plan. And similar to last year, before the summer break, staff will be presenting the capital plan, the objective of which really is to spread out the absorption of a lot of information as we get into financial planning. We will revisit the capital plan again in the fall, but given the scope and magnitude of it, we wanted to give you and the community a peek at it first before the break. Additionally, our staff will be talking to you about our asset management program and long-term financial planning and the strategy that staff are walking council through and looking for endorsement in terms of moving forward over the next couple of years. So the overarching strategy, as well as a peek into the capital plan, is forthcoming. So I'll pass it back over now to the other staff. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Glende. So good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Heather Boxrud, General Manager of Financial Services, and my pronouns are she, her. I am joined with Roland Russell, Senior Financial Analyst, and also we have several of our budget managers online and in Council chambers today that are here to answer any project-specific questions. In terms of agenda this morning, we have a fair bit to cover in this workshop. I will be starting us off with outlining the long-term financial plan strategy and what is guiding the district in our capital planning and including our guiding principles. I will also review what work the district has done to date and what work we have ahead of us. And then I'll review the long-term reserve methodology and touch on asset management and strategy. We will then shift to the details of the 24 to 28 capital expenditures, and I will review the prioritization work that has been done to date, and then I'll hand it over to Mr. Russell, who will walk us through the details of the asset management report recommendations and plans for the 24 to 28 capital plan in that respect, and then discuss changes from the 2023 to 27 financial capital plan and the projects that are new and have been added this year. So in the interest of time, as we have a lot to cover, I won't dig too into the details of the guiding principles, as we did dig into the details at the budget kickoff in June. But basically, the district conducts its financial planning process as outlined in the long-term financial plan and guiding principles and financial plan policy, bit of a mouthful, which has 4 principal categories that were developed to guide management and council in the financial planning process. These 4 categories are stable and sufficient, sustainable and equitable, prudent and flexible, efficient and measurable. So in terms of the transition to long-term financial planning, the district is in our 3rd financial plan cycle where we have been making efforts towards long-term financial planning. So for the public and new councillors, what we mean by long-term planning is addressing both short-term needs and long-term financial sustainability of the organization, and includes forecasting revenues and expenditures, renewing and reviewing the master plans, prioritizing capital requirements, and developing strategies to address funding gaps and financial challenges. Long-term planning also aims to build adequate reserves and make taxation predictable so that it does not fluctuate greatly from year to year. And I'll speak a little bit more to this in the coming slides. Want to take a quick moment to highlight where we are in the process and what work we do have ahead of us. In 2021, the district took steps towards putting structure around the the unappropriated accumulated surplus by the elimination of unappropriated accumulated surplus and creating the general operating reserve for the general fund. This positioned the district's accumulated surplus in either provisions or in reserves. In 2022, the district eliminated the annual tax-funded capital projects and positioned the capital expenditures to be funded by either external funding sources or by reserves. And that sets the framework and positions the district's capital planning process to transition into the long-term capital reserve funding program. As well, in 2022, Council endorsed the updated asset management plan, which was a tool for council and staff to inform the long-term financial planning and had not been updated since 2010. It also outlines the forecasting reserve contributions specific to the asset management plan, which is the replacing of existing assets. As part of the 24 to 28 financial planning process, staff have conducted an audit of the district's master plans and reprioritized the capital, which is before you today. The result is a truly risk-based approach to infrastructure requirements and service delivery. In September of 2023, staff will provide council with options to reestablish the current reserve contributions to close some of the funding gap and align with the recommendations of the asset management report. So that's coming to you in the fall. And then future work ahead of us will be to develop the 10-year capital plan, which will provide more insight into the long-term building and contribution of our reserves. To note, as you'll see in the diagram here, that the last 4 steps are iterative and something that will be an ongoing process every several years. So just want to highlight some key pieces to the long-term reserve funding and why it is best practice and why the district is making some considerable efforts to shift towards it. So first off, the benefits of long-term reserve building and contribution funding versus the historical practice of combination of reserve funding and capital funded from tax is that tax contributions to the capital program is through a systematic reserve contribution, which is based and grounded on the long-term capital needs. The result is then that tax contributions are predictable and sustainable annually. The reserve then funds the annual capital expenditures and will balance those high investment years with the low investment years, as the reserve will be continuously and systematically contributed to. In other words, the taxation contribution is smoothed over several years, regardless of the capital expenditures, ebbs and flows year to year. And again, the reserve funding program is also iterative and will be assessed regularly. The asset management report does recommend that asset management and reserve contribution funding is addressed every 5 years. So asset management is an important and significant piece of establishing the reserve contribution level requirements over the long term, but it's not the only piece, and it's really a derivative of the long-term financial planning and must incorporate more than just asset management. So other items that are included in long-term reserve funding is new assets and expansion of existing assets and reserves that do not have external funding sources and are not otherwise contemplated in the asset management plan. So assets and services that are a result of growth, upkeep and protection of natural assets where appropriate, staff resources to implement and support the capital plan, and then regular updates to master plans and condition assessments to support the long-term capital expenditures. In terms of asset management specifically, asset management in of itself is a long-term program. However, as I mentioned, is not the only component of the long-term plan. The district updated the asset management plan in 2022 and endorsed it in 2022 with the goal of working toward a funding recommendation within the plan. And Mr. Russell will dive into the details of that funding recommendation. We will be bringing back options in the fall. Specifically speaking to what asset management is, it's a proactive management of physical assets in order to sustain service delivery, the current service delivery. It does take a long-term approach. It's holistic and integrated and aims to address the life cycle for the replacement of all district assets. It provides a target reserve contribution for the replacement of existing assets. It's about managing risk. It's ongoing and iterative process and recommended to be revisited every 5 years. And it's a trade-off between desired services and the available resources. What it's not is meant to determine the annual capital spending. It does not include funding for growth, new or expanded services, or new facilities. And it does not address climate change. A key piece of what the 2022 asset management did tell us that the district has historically lacked investment in infrastructure to date and reserve building contributions for future infrastructure investments. However, the 2010 asset management did direct council into to making some efforts towards rebuilding the utility reserves. So at the very basis of where the district is at right now is good, but we do have a lot of work to go. Also worth noting is the asset management report this is not uncommon, the situation for local governments. It's often a result of annual tax funded capital projects as the practices drive decisions towards reducing the taxation annually through reducing capital investment rather than having master plans and capital plans being the sole driver of the capital investment decisions. So as I mentioned, staff will bring back the asset management funding options in the fall and with methodologies to close some of the gaps in the recommendations. So I'll take a pause there and pass it back over to the mayor if it's the mayor's will, just to maybe discuss the strategy before we move on into the capital plan itself.
Thank you for that. Councillor Greenlaw.
Thanks, through the chair. I just had a quick question about our asset management plan, and I was wondering if it included maintenance costs for our assets.
Perhaps we have somebody that can speak a little bit more to this, but just from a financial perspective, it does in terms of the theoretical life. So basically, in the recommendations of where the reserve contributions would get to is based on the asset's theoretical life, and the maintenance of those assets would expand that life, which would then in turn inform whether or not the risk profile in which we would put reserve contributions aside. So it is inherently in there, but the direct costs I don't think are necessarily built right into it. It just assumes that you will be maintaining these assets over the longer term.
Okay, so then where do, because, as you just pointed out, if you maintain your assets, they have longer lives. Where does that financial input get represented?
Through the mayor. Maintenance costs are part of the operations, maintenance, and administration costs of either the utilities or the general fund. So they're included in the base budget.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just a few questions. One, it's proposing scenario 3 in terms of basically the service life. Do we know which is a 50% over the theoretical service life scenario 1? Do we have any understanding from historical data whether or not that's reasonable or typical, or is that sort of a moot question because we will just adjust our maintenance to achieve that and it doesn't really matter what happened in the past? I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. Is this a realistic thing or is this really aspirational, or?
Thank you for the question through the chair. Mr. Russell will be getting into the asset management a little bit more in the future slides. And perhaps Mr. Wilson will want to speak to this as well. But in terms of typical and historical, I think we've come a long way since the 2010 asset management. There is a ways to go. Maintenance doesn't guarantee theoretical life, but it certainly can assist. And it is really about where we're at now and how much the council and the community is willing to fund the asset management and the risk in which we are willing to hold for that asset management.
Okay, thanks. And a couple other questions. One, just can you remind me what restrictions there are on us investing our reserves, like in guaranteed investments, or are we just not allowed to do that? Or
yes, great question through the chair. We are able to invest the cash of our reserves, but we are very restricted as a local government in what we can. So we can't, for example, invest in really risky profiles. It has to be a very low risk, and it's very structured.
And then one final sort of related question. Are we able to, I can't remember, borrow for our own reserves, and do we pay ourselves interest, or how does that work?
Again, great question. It depends on the situation. So we are able to borrow for, say, the DCC reserves, and the DCC reserves will pay back interest. For our own internal reserves, that's just actually a shift in funding from reserve funding to borrowing. So the reserves don't pay interest on that. It's just the organization. But across the fund, so a utility would pay for the interest versus the general fund.
So if we, for example, I guess, had a bunch of money in our utility reserves, our projections were that we weren't going to need to spend it for a while, our cash flow was good, could we then borrow against that for, say, Brenham Park instead of going to MFA for financing if we felt like we had enough, or is that offside?
We can interfund borrow, absolutely, but the interest side of things does not necessarily occur. It is just, but we are able to absolutely interfund borrowing, and that would require obviously the rigor of scheduling and maintaining those borrowing schedules.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, Councillor Pettingill's questions raised one for me. I'm just wondering if we have a policy on how we actually invest our reserves. I'm thinking in particular in line with our social procurement policy, for example. Do we have any guidelines with which we choose on the investment side?
Thank you, through the chair. We do not at this time, but it is on the radar to be developed in the future. Absolutely.
Okay, that's good to know. And then I'm just wondering if you can go back 2 slides with the arrows. Yeah, that one. Can you just, what do the arrows act? Is that the annual tax contribution is going up over to, like, what are the arrows?
Sure. I struggled with this to try to make it as visual and readable as possible. But the arrows representing the annual capital expenditure, so the reserve going down, the annual tax contribution to the reserve, so it going up. The bars across is to illustrate the long-term plan, and then the line at the top is to show that this is sort of a systematic contributions against the pressures of up and down, over time to sort of keep that reserve balance above what we require in the long-term plan.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then my last question was, you mentioned in your comments that this is really a risk-based approach to infrastructure renewal and service delivery. I'm just wondering if you can explain what you mean by a risk-based approach.
Certainly, through the chair. So some of the work that in quite incredible rigor that the engineering department did this year is really looking at their overall, all of their master plans and doing a fulsome audit. And I'm getting into a future slide here, but I'll be quick on it. An overall audit of the master plans, and then looking at that, prioritizing it based on risk, so on life safety, on legal requirements, and that kind of thing. And then as looking at that, and then within the constraints of our own funding right now, and trying to have a smooth distribution over the capital expenditures over long term, we were able to derive from that risk, like what we've prioritized, and that prioritization was risk-based. That makes sense.
Council, any other questions at this break? We're going to have plentiful breaks for other pieces. So, okay, over to you.
Thank you. Sorry. So moving on to the 24 to 28 capital plan. So just as I was speaking to, extensive feasibility, risk profiling, and prioritizing have been completed to inform the 24 to 28 capital plan. So in particular, the engineering department did champion an audit of the master plans of works and reprioritized several projects based on risk, life safety, the legislative requirements, and the district's strategic plan. So this work does account for the majority of the capital projects in the district's capital plan, and we will be undertaking similar work with the other departments in the future, although there has been some prioritization within those departments as well. Further, staff have ground truth the staff capacity And the initial indications are that the capital plan will require additional staff resources to complete, which will be primarily funded by the capital program. And further analysis on impacts throughout the organization will be required and will be brought forward for council consideration as part of the service level change discussion. So in terms of the key results of this reprioritization, and Mr. Russell will speak to it in more detail. However, some key shifts are that in the 2024 to 2028 financial plan are a reduction in the roads program for roads and bridges for 2 years, delays in the transportation improvements, delays in stormwater upgrades, and delay in cemetery upgrades. And so with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Russell to review the highlights of the 24 to 28 financial plan. Change stars.
Thank you very much, Ms. Boxrud. I'm going to continue our discussion of the 2024 through 2028 capital plan. And I'm going to speak at this stage to our overall size of the plan and overall funding sources. So what I wanted to show in this slide is that we have a fairly extensive capital plan. It's valued at $252 million over the next 5 years. $71 million of that is allocated to 2024. So you can see that it's not just a straight line that's even every year. It is tilted a little bit to the front end, which is not surprising because we have projects that are already underway, which, you know, are multi-year. So when you look at that, there's continuing work on a number of projects. And then in addition to that, we've added some additional projects for the new year, which will have a tendency to increase the spending at the front of the plan, let's say. So when we look at these various funding sources, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things related to them. For example, the external funding that relates to a specific project. It's upgrades at the Squamish Adventure Center, and we're working with Fortis to assist us in sponsoring an HVAC upgrade. The DCCs, they range across a number of projects and areas, including storm drainage, roads, and utilities. Those will be the areas of the greatest dominance of DCCs. There are also some DCCs associated with parks. We have a fair amount of funding from senior levels of government, both the province and the feds, and major projects that are currently underway that are being funded by grants include two major projects at Brenham Park. So Brenham Park Revitalization 1 in phase 1 and phase 2. Significant diking projects, both the Juanek Sea Dike and the Jimmy Judd Slough upgrade, and also work being done on the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. With respect to borrowing, we have, again, there's a significant amount of borrowing taking place within the overall plan, and major projects that are currently underway that are reliant on borrowing include the Public Works Building, wastewater treatment plant expansion, and the borrowing there is DCC supported, and fire hall number 2. And would like to just make a quick comment with respect to the community amenities contributions that we highlight there. They're primarily for Brennan Park amenity projects. So in continuing on, speaking about funding sources, there are some highlights. We are faced with some constraints with respect to our ability to finance our capital plan on an ongoing basis. As I noted previously, it is a fairly extensive capital plan, and when you're spending that much money, you will run into some funding constraints, and that would be normal for an organization of our size. So specifically, the DCCs, they may not be sufficient to cover all of our road projects. And specifically, when we look at that, we see that the Laurelwood Pemberton Bridge is being added to the end of this financial plan. So the design and then into the construction would actually take place outside of this 24 to 28 time frame. But that bridge will be a very expensive structure, and it is quite likely that it will require more roads DCC funding than we have available at that time. So we will have to consider either the potential of delaying the bridge or other methodologies to fund the bridge in conjunction with DCCs. With respect to debenture borrowing, you can see here that we've highlighted that our debt service ratio is 17%. Our limit is 20%. We have a self-imposed 20% debt limit. So that all seems good, but 17% of 20 means that we've used up 85% of our debt. So there's not a lot of additional space for us to take on greater debt financing within the capital plan. With respect to the district reserves, as we've highlighted previously and will again, the reserves will require ongoing tax support for our reserve contributions. Reserve contributions will need to increase to allow us to manage the asset management plan requirements, also capital cost escalation, and other factors that are pushing up costs with respect to the capital plan. And finally, with respect to government grants, it should be noted that there are some projects where the viability of those projects will be based on the availability of grants. And so as an example, we've added a couple of expansion projects at Brennan Park in the last years of this capital plan. And those projects specifically will be grant dependent. So here we are at one of our favorite slides, the asset management slide. And we speak here of the various, scenarios and what levels we're at and how this plays out. So what I wanted to highlight for council and the public is what these numbers kind of mean at this point. So I would like to, I'll start with the utility funds. So in the utility funds, I should make this remark. The graphic that you are seeing is taken from the 2022 asset management report. The 2022 asset management report was based on budgeted information in the 2021 through 2025 capital plan. So we're now in 23. These numbers are a bit out of date, okay, and things have changed. So I will comment on that. So with respect to the utility funds, on this chart, it says water, the current funding level is $2 million. We're currently at that $2 million level as depicted here. And so there is no real shortfall with respect to reaching scenario 3 level for water. With respect to the wastewater, it is showing here a shortfall of approximately $800,000. Between 2021 and 2023, our contributions to the wastewater reserve have increased. That contribution now is $2.7 million, not $2 million as depicted here. And as a result, the shortfall in wastewater is roughly $100,000 or slightly less than $100,000. So in both of those instances, the contribution to the reserve meets the level or maintaining the current level of contribution, allows us to meet the scenario 3 level. We would and do intend to progress from this into the future. We would like to move, as recommended in the report, the utilities up to, at a minimum, probably the level scenario 2 level, and ultimately we would like to get them to scenario 1. And we will be looking at what options are required and what rates may be necessary for us to do that over time. The last item I would say is with respect to solid waste. It is showing here that solid waste doesn't have a shortfall. That's true on the basis of this report. But what I do need to point out is that within the 24 through 28 capital plan, we are showing the costs of the new landfill expansion. That new landfill expansion is not included in the calculation of the funding level required for solid waste. So solid waste looks great if you don't need a new landfill, but we will. So that those numbers will change, and it is not to suggest that solid waste is in jeopardy. I don't believe they are, but this is a little optimistic, let's say. Okay. The other comment that I would like to make, and this is where the item comes in with respect to solid waste, is the asset management plan refers to the replacement of existing. Okay, so it doesn't look at expansion. So, for example, a new landfill is considered an expansion. It's so in. That is the rationale for why that was not included. Okay. So lastly, we're going to speak to the general fund. So in this analysis, the general fund is showing a contribution of 3.3 million. We're currently at about 3.5 million. So we're slightly higher than the number it shows here. But as you can see, to reach level 3, scenario 3 level, in this analysis, it would record there is a $2.8 million shortfall. If we adjust that slightly, we're still looking at a $2.6 million shortfall to reach scenario level 3 for the general fund. We will be bringing forward different asset management scenarios this fall, which will outline methodologies that we believe that the district can employ to allow us to close that gap over time. These are some highlights with respect to changes to existing projects. And so I would comment that the preparation of the report and the enclosures in the report was done similarly in 2024 as to how we presented the 2023 capital plan, in that we showed new projects, we showed changes in existing projects, and then we showed a categorization of all of the various projects, because in fairness, there's, I believe, well over 100 capital projects in total over the 5-year span. So to try to wade through all of the projects all of the time to get additional detail becomes difficult. And we also want to look at this from a longer term planning perspective. And from a longer term planning perspective, the items that have already been approved, what's important with respect to those items are changes that are being made to existing projects, and the cost of existing projects or the timing of existing projects. And in addition to that, identifying specifically what are the new projects, so where are the priorities for the organization, and what types of things are being added. So here we speak to changes on existing projects, and you will note the first one is we are reducing the project funding for roads and bridges in 2024 and 2025. That is based on engineering department risk analysis, and we will be moving back to the original levels in 2026. That is what's proposed in this plan. So it will be a reinstatement of the current level. It is not an attempt to make up lost ground, so to speak. The 2-year hiatus or reduction within the capital plan for roads and bridges is basically allows us to reprioritize our funding to address other higher risk items that are within the capital plan. There are some delays to core infrastructure. We've just dropped our total spending a little bit over the next 2 years in both transportation improvements and also storm sewer upgrades, as was outlined previously. We had a project for upgrading the Squamish Adventure Center envelope upgrade, and that was going to go in 2025. That was a grant reliant project. We've been informed that the people we were anticipating might come through with a grant will not, so we removed that project. The cemetery upgrade has been delayed. Originally, it was planned as a 23-24 project, and then it was delayed subsequently to 24-25. And part of that was done to allow us to align that better with other projects that are underway and work plan characteristics that would be required to allow us to manage this. And lastly, as a result of Community Works Fund grant wrapping up at the end of 2023, we have made a tactical decision to fund to continue with the active transportation program in 2024, but to fund the active transportation components in 2024 through other sources. So they'll be funded through grants and through DCCs, as opposed to Community Works Fund. It is quite feasible that Community Works Fund grant program will be reinstated at some future time, but at this point, to be prudent, that has not been announced. It would be presumptuous on our behalf to suggest that that was money in the bank that we could spend. We're going to speak about new projects, and with respect to the new projects, these are just some of the very high level highlights. There are many other new projects in this plan besides these. So there are some Brennan Park Recreation Center upgrades, And these upgrades that we're speaking to here are work requirements that are in addition to the revitalization projects that are currently underway at Brennan Park. Not all of the work that we require to undertake at Brennan Park is supportable by the grants that we have. Some of the items that we want to do are not don't fall into the categorizations that the grant supports. So we do require a little bit of additional funding to allow us to manage those items that are outside of the grant-sponsored project. We're replacing one of our fire apparatus, and that's a staged project. We will be ordering the apparatus in 2025 for a delivery in 2027 because it takes a couple of years to build a fire truck. We have stormwater pipe capacity upgrades occurring towards the end of the plan. And again, that's part of our longer term program to ensure appropriate levels of maintenance and rehabilitation of our infrastructure systems so that we try to avoid significant downtime or damage to our infrastructure. And lastly, we have an expansion of a DCC funded expansion of the Loggers Lane roadway. There are actually a number of DCC funded projects in this plan towards the end of the plan, and I happen to select this one. Other items that are DCC funded that could have been highlighted would be the downtown entrance, as an example, and there are a number of smaller ones that are ongoing that were identified previously. So this is a new one. And again, it should be noted that we review the DCC rates on a regular basis and update them probably on a biannual cycle, do a major upgrade, or I shouldn't say upgrade, review and adjustment to try to keep up with cost escalation. We recognize, as we had outlined before, that in some instances, DCC total revenue may be challenged with the total amount of DCC revenue available. And so we are undertaking ongoing reviews on a regular basis to ensure that we have the ability to get the most value possible from developments and development financing. And with that, I will turn it back to the chair. And that is the end of our presentation at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Council, any questions about what we've heard so far? Councillor Hamilton and then Councillor French.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you very much. I think this transition into long-term asset management is amazing. It's amazing to me that we weren't already there 5 years ago. But to me, it seems like having a savings account so that you can fix things when they break. I saw that in the asset management plan, the 2022 asset management plan, the landfill wasn't identified there. And you explained that it was not an existing facility, so that it didn't appear in the 2022 asset management plan document. Does that mean, so things like the new water clarifier, the new public works building, those things also do not appear and are not accounted for in the 2022 asset management plan?
Through the chair, that is correct. So as an example, you spoke of new public works facility. We are building about $60 million worth of additional facilities. So 2 new fire halls plus public works. And total cost of those assets will will be over $60 million by the time we finish. Those are not included. So if we were to look at that and say $60 million over 100 years, it's roughly $600,000 a year. If you look at the sliding scale that was presented in the asset management plan, I would suggest if it was 600,000 at one end, probably 400 at the other. So yeah, so there's a gap, but that gap's actually larger than it appears on paper because we have added assets.
Thank you. I'll just add to that as well is the asset management really is just a component of the long-term planning, and it really is focused on the replacement of existing assets. Now, once those facilities are built, they become an existing asset, and the next reiteration of the asset management will include that.
Thanks. It's a piece of the asset management plan I had not sort of fully understood, but because that's this the way I now understand that is to mean that that's the base level, is not the expected level. Okay. On our capital expenditure, 2024, we're at about 70 million. 2025, we come down to 45 million. 2026, we come down to 42 million. 2027, we come down to 33 million. And then 2028, we bump up to 59 million in total. And in 2028, we've got 5 major projects that are bumping us up into this 59 million. Whereas those projects don't exist in 2024. I have some concern that we are underestimating our capital expenditures moving on into the future, because there are many, many small items that pop up every year, right? That we don't, it doesn't seem to me like we're accounting for these many, many small items. And I'm not suggesting that we predict whether the Ford F-150 is going to be needing to be replaced in 2027, but there is a base of tens of millions of dollars that we need to maintain the infrastructure we have. Can you speak to that a little bit? If you understand my question.
Through the chair. Yeah, we understand that. And yes, you're probably correct. What we see happening, and it's not necessarily just human nature, I think it's also our ability to look into the future. It's much easier for staff to be able to determine what projects they need in years 1, 2, and 3 than it is to determine what projects they're going to need in years 4 and 5. So you generally see a reduction in costs over time. We're working on improving our ability to project what future requirements will be and when they need to be slotted in. That's part and parcel of that overall master plan audit process, for example, that's being undertaken in engineering, is an attempt to allow us to be able to flush that out a little better and fill in some of those gaps, because we are aware that there will be additional work over and above what you see in the capital plan that will be required that hasn't been identified yet.
Yep, follow up. And is it on this point? Okay. And Hamilton first, and then we'll get Pettingill.
Thanks. So it seems there's different ways to plan for how much things are going to spend. You either count how much every brick costs and every piece of wood costs, and that's time consuming and difficult, or you ask, what's the average price for building a house these days? How much has it cost in the past 10 years? And I think that's called reference forecasting, where you take a reference body and you look at how much it's cost. It would seem to me like we have the tools and we have the information to do that referencing from our own data, just looking at 2019 to 2024, how much has our baseline been, extracting maybe very large projects in the tens of millions of dollars, just to see what that baseline is. Can we do that?
Thank you for the question through the chair. Yeah, so just to back up to your initial question and just to add further clarification, the shifting towards long-term planning is a fairly new process for the district. And part of that, as Mr. Russell explained, is to really do some of that work around the master plan audits. There's a lot of moving parts, and it is a lot of work in terms of engineering. Sort of took the first real rigor to it this year, and we will be replicating that throughout the organization more. But what was very apparent is that work just in that current rigor of those master plans really only were able to crack the first few years, and we will be working towards that. And that is the goal of the longer term planning, but it is time to do it and work to do it. So we're absolutely working on those improvements and moving the district that way, and absolutely using some reference costing would be part of that, and looking at different methodologies in which we could potentially put placeholders in the financial plan longer term, knowing that some of these things will pop up that are not in our master plans. That's a reality of organization with so many moving parts and so many pieces. So yeah, it's a great point, and we're definitely working towards that.
Councillor Penigo, you had a question on this point, and then we'll go to Councillor French.
Yeah, just a clarification, because I think a point was made by my colleague, something to the effect of we're not sort of expecting to predict out when a Ford F-150 needs to be replaced, but I think we do have a fleet management plan, and so we are including that in our 5-year financial plan. Is that included in our asset management plan to the fleet management stuff, or is that just in the 5-year financial plan?
To the mayor, the numbers that you see in the asset management documentation include equipment under the general fund. And it should be noted that with respect to our equipment replacement reserve and our equipment management program is fully funded. So the shortfall that you are seeing there is not related to equipment. I will make this proviso. We anticipate that the costs of electrification will be higher than the costs of our previous vehicles that were being replaced. So although the equipment reserve currently is in very good shape, we do anticipate that in future years, there will be more significant drawdowns against that reserve as we start to see more and more electric vehicles become available, because they tend to be more expensive.
Okay, are you good for now, Councillor Hamilton? And then I'll go to Councillor French, then Stoner.
Thanks, Mayor. And in one of the tables within the staff report, there's some columns that are labeled annual costs, and then there's individual years. I have a feeling I probably ask this question every year, but I can never remember the answer. Some of the numbers are in brackets, some are unbracketed. The bracketed amount is followed by the same amount the following year. What does that mean?
Thank you through the chair. Great question. So the schedule you're referring to is the changes in existing capital plan. So what that aims to show is the brackets is the reduction in the 1 year where it used to be, and then the addition in a future year. So it's just to really trying to establish a visual on the changes.
Okay, thank you for that. And in the presentation today, I was reminded of the Masheter and Squamish water intake systems not being included in the asset management plan. And so then that got me wondering, do we have reserve funds existing to support these two facilities if for some reason we need to put money into them? Like the example of significant damage because of a landslide or something along that line?
Through the mayor, we could access the water reserve, water utility reserve, to fund capital works associated with either of those facilities. And I believe that there are studies and work planned within the 5-year plan to do so, to do some upgrades to ensure future protection of those assets.
Okay, thank you. And I was coming into this meeting looking carefully at the vehicle bridge that is going to link Laurelwood to Pemberton and thinking we need to speed up the timeline on that project. And then I heard in your presentation that if anything, we might actually be delaying it because of funding shortfalls potentially. So I think my question here is, did I hear that correctly? That if anything, we're going to be pushing the timeline back for the Laurelwood Pemberton Bridge?
Through the chair, there are two answers to this question, and I will give you one half of the answer. When you speak to strictly to a funding perspective, we finance believes, based on the analysis of projects included in the plan, including increases, proposed increases in DCC funding, that not all of the DCC funded capital projects related to roads will be affordable, perhaps within the timeframes that they are presented. Okay, and to be fair, specifically, the bridge is the largest single roadway DCC funded project that we have, or that we see coming up on the horizon. It also happens to be scheduled to occur after a couple other fairly significant projects. So it is possible that we may run out of money before that. So that's the dollars and cents answer. On the other side, the reason that the bridge is placed into the plan at the time that it is based on engineering studies and transportation movements, car counts, those types of things. And I'm not an engineer, but that's when they believe that the necessary growth will have taken place in the community and the bridge will be required. So those two items may be in conflict, is what I would say at this stage. And I can't decide which one's going to win, because truthfully, I think that decision is what we're going to put towards you rather than us, using both the best information we can provide you from a financial standpoint and also from an engineering standpoint. So it is possible that it may need to be pushed back, but it's also possible that at the will of council, they could bring it forward. So I think at the end of the day, that decision will be yours, not mine. But there is clearly a conflict that is suggested within the plan.
Okay, thank you for that. Mayor, I have other questions, but they're a little deeper into the weeds, so I think I'll hold them and see what our timing is like.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Picking up on this point from Councillor French, we did just recently update our DCC bylaw, and I'm hearing that we're still not collecting the amount that we think we foresee that we need for the projects in that bylaw. And so to me, that signals that we need to update our DCC bylaw again. Is that something that staff are considering at this point?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. Yes, during the amendment in the spring, we did add some money towards a major relook of the DCC bylaw again. It was updated last October, I believe, and as soon as it was adopted, it is already outdated. That's how quickly costs are moving in our current environment.
And just remind me, we collect DCCs at building permit?
Through the chair, that's correct.
All right. So even projects that have potentially been rezoned, once they go, that we will still be able to capture them in a DCC bylaw update if they haven't started building yet. That's great news. So grateful that project is underway. My other high level question is just trying to get you to help me to wrap my head around the long-term funding reserve program a little bit more. I think one of the challenges that I have with it, and I hear that this might be coming in the fall, is understanding what the taxation impact is to make sure that our reserves are at an adequate level. And so going through the capital plan at this first phase, there's actually no indication of what that might mean from a taxation perspective. So can you just walk me through how we get from today to understanding what the actual tax requirement is, ideally on a more consistent basis year over year, to fund the long-term reserve program?
Thank you for the question through the chair. Currently we are establishing our capital plan based on the risk profile and the priorities and things that we need to do as an organization. The idea behind building it over a long-term plan is right now we don't have the overly long-term plan. We have the 5-year plan. What we do have is a really long-term component of the long-term plan, which is the asset management plan. That is already giving us indications to what reserve contributions we do need to target. Again, this is very iterative, and this is a work that we will take digestible steps towards, and it is not an immediate emergency. These are things that we build over time, and that will be the options brought forward in the fall, is some further analysis and options for whatever council is comfortable with will be brought forward, and we can choose to do that. And then once we have that longer term plan, we go back and we reestablish it. So it's a constantly moving, constantly building process, if that is answering your question.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. And then my other question is building on that. So how do we collectively assess what our risk tolerance is? So for example, in this year, we are putting on hold some of the annual paving work. If I go back and read the annual paving master plan, we are actually already funding it below what the master plan suggests. And so I'm not trying to discredit the amazing work that our staff do, and I am not an engineer, but as a decision maker, as I read that master plan, it's going counter to what I've been told and what previous council had endorsed, which was actually to maintain that funding level. And so how do we transition from that to feeling comfortable with where we're setting our risk tolerance going forward?
Through the chair, I'll start, and then I'll let Mr. Rolston get into the details a little bit more. So in terms of the risk profiling, it really came down to prioritization holistically across the organization. So it's bringing in all of the master plans and doing that audit. There's going to be trade-offs, and this is where it's at. They are all in competition for funding, and at the end of the day, when the profile has been analyzed, that is the areas that the engineering team felt were the least risk to the organization, and as such, those changes were made.
If I can just through the chair on that, I think the tension that I then see is how big that prioritization list depends on our willingness to put taxation money towards the reserves. So like how big can we make that list, and where is that risk balance between us being willing to advocate for more taxation dollars to support that list versus how do we know when staff are just going to come back and say, actually, no, this really does need to go on like above the line, as we've often said in budget. And how do we work together and with the community to understand what our collective risk tolerance is when we don't have visibility, and probably shouldn't have visibility, into the list of the engineering department's work. But we are going against what some of our master plans have said.
Great question. And it is sort of a stepped and phased process. So the current situation is what we have in terms of planning for our current funding situation, noting that we are building those reserves over time. The risk, I'll let Mr. Rolston speak to specifically, but that is the situation in which we're in today. And building that risk tolerance is going to be that development of the long-term plan, is what it comes down to.
Through the chair, further to that, so as Ms. Boxer and Mr. Russell have mentioned, the engineering department has been going through a risk exercise, looking at all of our master plans, completing an audit, and based on that and the asset management plan, we have a funding shortfall. And so we're in this situation of having to prioritize. And as it was mentioned, we looked at life safety and legislative legal requirements. And ultimately, the paving program isn't a life safety issue. There are impacts of underfunding it, including higher long-term asset management costs, lower level of service in terms of the condition of our roadways. But ultimately, because we're in a situation where we needed to cut the cost of our capital program, that was deemed to be one of the areas that was easiest to cut without significantly increasing the risk to the community. With that said, we are planning to update our pavement management plan next year. And so that will inform that long-term funding level. So there will be opportunity in future years to adjust that amount to account for if we do end up reducing our investment over the next 2 years. So that's not reflected. Those future costs are not reflected in the current financial plan because we need to go through this master planning exercise. But just to let council know that that work will be undertaken next year to inform the long-term pavement management costs.
Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, just on this, I am curious if it's possible at all to give council and the community an understanding of what the actual demand, like what would be the financial impact of actually achieving all of our master plans? Like how far are we from where we think we need to be according to each of our master plans, and that gap of where staff think that we are setting our prioritization level at? Like, I don't know if that's $100 million or $10 million, or so that's why I'm having a hard time sitting here understanding and feeling comfortable with, appreciate the list of things and prioritizing life safety. Those are all important for sure. But how far are we from actually the ideal scenario? And should I even ask that question, or is it too scary?
Through the mayor. So the table that was shown earlier on the asset management plan, that shows the existing shortfall that we have with respect to maintaining existing assets. As Ms. Boxer said, the asset management plan is one element of all of our costs. And so the exercise that we're going to be completing later this year with the long-term financial plan is to layer in master planning costs. So level of service, capacity increases, things like our landfill. So really that's the work that needs to take place, is to layer in all of the costs, not just asset management, and then look at our existing funding levels and to make that assessment. So we don't have that information at this point, but that's a work in progress that we will report back to council on.
Thank you for that. We've heard a little bit about the about reviewing the DCC and bylaw and how its shelf life was a bit short maybe this time around with just the way the world's changing so quickly. And I'm happy to hear that there's that review is scheduled to happen. What about the asset management, like more broadly? Is that biannually? Is it only when bigger things are added? I know we've talked about some of the pieces of that, but the actual piece we've been working from, what's the schedule of update on that particular document?
Through the mayor, the cycle for renewing our asset management plan is a 5-year cycle. So we do intermediate reviews on specific classes of infrastructure, but the asset management plan is every 5 years, and that's determined to be sort of an appropriate time frame where you don't want to do it every year because there is a cost and a resource associated with that. You want to allow some time to pass to accumulate new assets and to understand what's happening with construction cost inflation and the life cycle of our assets. And so that's basically been deemed to be an appropriate cycle for renewal.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. And I'll just add, just for folks to keep in mind that asset management is a really long term. So any changes in costs and inflation is felt over a long term, whereas the DCC bylaw is a little bit more reactionary and immediate. So you do want to do that rigor quite more frequently.
No, thank you. I appreciate that, and that timing makes sense. Earlier we were talking, there were some questions around the sort of getting that an extra 25% or 50% of life out of the asset, and the maintenance to do that comes with operation. But what's the mechanism to understand if we're in a diminishing returns sort of point where we're much better to take on that replacement? I'm just thinking about an old car that I have that seems to be at over 50% of its expected lifetime, and it costs money to keep it going. And how do we capture that, given that those funds come from two different places, and how do those? And I'm sure that we do, but just I'd like to understand the mechanisms for that.
Through the Mayor, it's a complex question, and it depends on what type of infrastructure you're talking about. At this point, we're in the general fund, we're underfunded even for that scenario 3. And so there is inherent risk in doing that. And there's a certain inherent acceptance that we will have to perform some emergency repairs, which is more costly than doing things proactively. But it's a very complex question to actually answer with accuracy. What is that exact point? But that is the exact purpose of the asset management plan, is to try and hone in on the ideal funding levels. And that's where the asset management plan recommends to be at least moving towards providing funding for scenario 3.
Yeah, thank you. I think the concern or the curiosity comes from a potential concern that we have, that we've moving that sort of responsibility for that asset to operations rather than the replacement of that asset, and just that we're doing that in a mindful way. So I understand that could be different for each asset, but that's sort of where the concern comes in. And sorry, did you have a reply?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add to what Mr. Wilson said, is that the asset management is really that, again, that long term, where when it comes to the urgency of a replacement of a certain asset, that is built in through the master planning, and as well as the various staff members' review of what needs to be done and put into the capital plan. The asset management does not determine the capital plan. It just basically gives the overall roadmap on the contributions. So if there's any comfort in that, is that we are assessing our capital plans yearly. So those urgent items will hopefully bubble up to the top on the overall asset management.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this before we dive into the next chapter? Oh, go ahead, Councillor Hamilton.
On the asset management plan, there were 7 recommendations in the 2022 asset management plan regarding asset data, improving asset data. I was really interested when it's the first time I've dug through that document, and it was interesting to see that there's a lot of our underground infrastructure, we don't know what it is. We don't know what type of pipe, for example, this is. So it's tough to predict how long it's going to live. I can see those challenges, and this maybe it's my leaning towards knowing data. How is our progress towards those 7 recommendations? And do we have a plan to meet those 7 recommendations before our next asset management plan so that we can do it efficiently and more effectively?
Through the Mayor, thanks for the question. So all of those 7 recommendations are ongoing works in progress, and they are long-term initiatives. So it's something that we'll always need to be working towards. They pertained a lot to including additional information along with our assets. So things like when we've rebuilt a road, incorporating asset condition into our GIS, so that when we do our asset management plan update, we have more than just the year of something. We have the year and the condition, so that informs our investment level. So the engineering department, every year we're improving our information on asset by completing condition assessments. That includes videoing our sewer and our storm sewer network, which is an annual program, and now taking the results of that, incorporating into GIS. The IT department is working on asset management software, and that pertains to one of the recommendations of creating a single source of truth for all of our asset data. So that's also a work in progress with some pilot projects that are taking place right now. So there is significant progress. And when we update the asset management plan in 5 years or 4 years from now, we'll certainly have much better. But again, that's going to be an ongoing process we always have to do, essentially.
Do you have one? Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
I have some detailed questions about the capital projects. Are we there yet?
I don't want to, well, let's just check in with staff. Are we going, where are you taking us next? And is there a better spot for that? Or would you like those detailed questions at this point? Or is there a primer between here and there?
Thank you. Now is a great time. We have no further presentation. So if this is the time for council, it's the time for staff.
Okay. Councillor Stoner. And I know you have a list as well, Councillor French. You're on mine.
All right. So my first one, Mr. Rolston, is to you. And this has to do with deferring some of our key projects. And the one that always jumps out at me is the annual flood protection program. And so that's one that we've typically earmarked about $4 million a year. Last year we deferred. And in the current proposed capital plan, we're deferring again for another few years. So I'm just wondering if staff can speak to the risks of doing that and the justification.
Through the mayor, I jumped Mr. Ralston on this one. I think it's easier for me to explain this. The amounts in 2023 and 2024 that were deferred have been reallocated, and those costs relate to increased cost of Honeck Sea Dike. So that's the money's being spent. It's just being spent on a different project. So there's no real, how should I put it? There's no real delay or reduction in our total funding. It's the annual program is a placeholder for us to seek grants and allow us to do work to allow the engineering group to specify the next major project. And then that major project will probably take 2 or 3 years worth of total financing of the annual flood protection plan. So 23 and 24 have been reassigned to Honeck Sea Dike, and 25 has been assigned to Jimmy Judd Slough. So all of the money that the district had intended to spend on flood protection is still part of the overall plan. It's just now been assigned to specific projects.
Appreciate that rationale. I think that's where one of the challenges lies, where it's like those projects have increased in cost. So there is delay in terms of achieving the master plan, because the foresight was that with $4 million a year, we'd be able to move X number of projects forward. And we're not doing that. Although the risk of flooding and the risk of climate related disasters is increasing exponentially, we are actually doing less of the integrated flood hazard management plan as was expected. And so this is going back to that risk tolerance piece, where I understand from a financial perspective, there are pressures on our budget. Protecting our community with diking is equally as important. And I'm having a hard time saying, yeah, I think that's okay, as opposed to putting an extra however many $1 million into the budget that's needed.
Through the mayor, it's an excellent comment, and staff also acknowledged that. A couple of points to that. One is just that expenditures on flood protection are lumpy, I would say, as opposed to uniform, because of the complex nature of them. Working in and around the water, permitting often takes years. So from that perspective, and Hunaic Park is a perfect example that we've been working on that project for 3 years and still don't have permits. But we are expecting them soon. We're expecting to start spending money on that this year. And it's not reflected in the financial plan, but we intend on carrying forward a significant amount of money into next year. And so we expect to be spending several $1 million in 2024 that's not reflected in the financial plan because it's a carry forward. But then also with respect to the underspending and not keeping up with the recommendations of the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan, we do have an Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan update that's included in the financial plan in 2027, I believe. And one of the main objectives of that report is to assess the increased costs that we've seen since original adoption of the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan, and to reassess what is an appropriate level of expenditure to achieve our flood protection goals by a specified date in order to manage community risk. So that is definitely on staff's radar to be looking into that.
Okay, that's helpful to consider. Thank you for the feedback. There's a few other items. I'm curious, in the capital plan, there's an RCMP housing support trailer. And I'm just wondering, first, are these types of expenses cost shared with the federal government as per our RCMP contracts? And if not, I really do, and in addition to that, I really do appreciate the need here, but I'm also curious if this is setting a bit of a precedent for providing staff housing that we don't otherwise see within the municipality.
Thank you, through the mayor. Thank you for the question. This is really for dormitory style accommodation. So this would be for staff while they're on shift, if they're living out of community, or if we have officers who are working in Squamish on overtime from other communities, which often happens for special investigations and different case files. It would not be cost shared with the federal government. It would be a capital cost on the district should council choose to proceed with this.
On this point, Councillor Pettingill, go ahead.
Yeah, is this like a short or long-term rental of a trailer? Is this a purchase of one that we would own and sort of have not indefinite life, but however long a trailer lasts, 15, 20 years?
Thank you, through the mayor. It would be a purchase.
Are you good, Councillor Stoner?
I'll sneak one more in. And
One more, then we'll go to
Okay.
Councillor French.
Which one to start with? The fleet reserve. I'm just curious. So this is a good, I think, microcosm of our broader reserve approach. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to how contributions are allocated to it, how much is in the reserve, and how we're managing the inflationary pressures on vehicles in particular at the moment. There's a number of vehicles within the existing master plan that have almost doubled in cost, and it just says that they're being covered by the fleet reserve, but it's hard to know how much is in there or how we're allocating money to cover that.
Through the mayor, the fleet reserve is projected to have a balance of just over $6 million at the end of 2023. The average draws on the fleet reserve are roughly $1 million a year, with a significant increase in 2027 to reflect the fire apparatus that we pointed out earlier. The ongoing contributions to the fleet reserve are approximately $900,000 or slightly higher than that. And that's a combination of revenue taken from the general fund, which is about $800,000, and then $100,000 to $200,000 per year from utility contributions to the fleet reserve. And the utility contributions are fluctuate because they're dependent on what additional equipment is purchased for the utilities. And so the big one that's outstanding is we're looking at buying a vac truck, which we keep pushing off by a year. So when we get to that vac truck, the contributions to the fleet reserve from the utilities will increase to reflect the additional assets that have been purchased on their behalf. So right now it's pretty close to a break even kind of standpoint, we are looking at that reserve over 5 years, going down by roughly $2.5 million. And again, the largest single chunk of that is reflecting the fact that we spent $1.8 million on a single item. So outside of that, I would say the fleet reserve is probably in pretty good shape. We do acknowledge that these costs, as outlined today, probably do not adequately reflect the future cost of replacements. So we anticipate that as we get better information on what those replacement costs will be, the expenditure side will go up, and we will therefore adjust the contribution requirements to match that as we move into the future. But at this point in time, there's too many variables that have not been adequately measured to allow us to do a really good job of updating what the fleet replacement costs will be based on electrification.
Thank you. Councillor French.
Thank you, Mayor, and into the weeds we go. The Brennan Park concession / Parks Administration building in the capital spending plan, we see $600,000 in 2025 being dedicated to that, and the description is a little bit limited. So I'm wondering, what does that $600,000 get us? Is it just the demolition of the building, or what's involved there?
I'm hoping that Mr. Bragg is on the line, will be able to answer that question for us, please.
Through the chair, yes, that includes demolition and construction of new, and it's an early estimate at the moment. There's a few other projects that we're looking at tacking onto there as well, but that's an estimate at this stage, and it does include demolition, yes.
$600,000 to bring it down and replace it? I don't know. I'm not buying that, but I'll leave that in staff's capable hands. There's also $95,000 to purchase what's described as a beach groomer, and there's reference in the description to Squamish Feather Park. And I'm wondering, is that a piece of equipment that will sit collecting dust 48 weeks out of the year, or is it a piece of equipment that is multi-use and could serve other purposes?
I think James Story is on the line to take this question. Through the chair. Yeah, no, as I understand it, for beach maintenance, so that would be used throughout the year. As we all know, Squamish is, we don't get a lot of snow, so the beach will be open throughout the year. And the main thing about that is not only to keep the sand looking nice, but it picks up debris such as broken glass, needles, or other things that may be on the beach. And so that's the reason for that piece of equipment.
Thank you. I just saw a hand over here. Is it on this point, Councillor Penigo? Go ahead.
Yeah, and I wasn't on council at the time, I don't think, when the park and so on, the whole details of the deal were discussed, but it seems to me to be a bit of a recurring theme that when, in particular, parks are offered as an amenity, they tend to come with a lot of operational and equipment costs that we don't always anticipate. And so I'm wondering what we can do or what we need to do when these sorts of things come together with a land development agreement or CAC to understand the costs of what we're getting a little better, especially around parks.
Through the mayor, with respect to the downtown park specifically, so oceanfront and waterfront, Parks Department had identified the potential of increased costs being associated with those parks opening, and they had included both equipment purchases in fleet and also additional staffing requirements to allow us to maintain those additional parks. So within the financial plan that was presented in 2022, in the future years, and I think at that point it was projecting it to be in 2024, it had included costs for additional staff, to another shift, so to speak, of park staff to manage the new parks. So when there seems to be a sufficient level of certainty around park development occurring, and we're able to forecast that, staff have been including projections for what they believe the future costs of those are, so that we have the ability to plan for that within our financial plan. So I hope that answers your question.
Back to you, Councillor French.
Okay, one more, and I promise it'll be my last. Maybe I shouldn't promise. The line item about CN and rail crossing improvements jumped out at me. In the previous term, I have no recollection of CN coming to us with any money. I have no recollection of any other organization, be it BC Rail Properties, the provincial government, the federal government, kicking in money to improve rail crossings. Meantime, they continue to degrade. So at what point do we stop waiting for money to come elsewhere and take it on ourselves? Or what are the options here to actually get some rail crossing improvements happening?
Through the chair, good morning. My name is Jesse Morwood, Capital Projects Manager. That line in the budgets references specifically one rail crossing. It's the Cleveland, the downtown Cleveland crossing only. There was a study a few years ago that looked at all the crossings, and that was found to be deficient in the new federal transportation guidelines. CN is undertaking that work later this year, and the district is cost sharing. I believe it's 50% on that project, and that's part of the CN and municipal agreement we have. As far as other crossing initiatives, that there are none planned at the moment. This was, like I said, dealing with a known deficiency as far as the regulations. However, we are looking at some, in the long term, we are looking at some other crossings as well as CN, and that includes installing, for example, concrete track crossings to make it smoother for traffic. I believe one of them they're looking at is for example, Government Road just north of Mamquam, mile 41.01, actually. So yes, there are some things in the work, but specifically that money is for Cleveland. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Greenlaw, then Anderson.
Thanks. Through the chair, these questions are a little bit tangential, but I'm just continuing on some of the thoughts that Councillor Stoner expressed. Obviously climate change is going to be a major expenditure in our future. And you mentioned specifically that this doesn't cover any climate change mitigation, but I was just wondering if that's being captured somewhere in our budget. If so, where and how we're trying to predict what these costs will be. Nice, easy questions for you.
Through the chair, to answer your question, it's a two-part question. When we made the statement, asset management costs do not include additional climate-related expenses. I think the reference there was if there are future expenditure requirements that are required specifically to address climate change, those would not have been included in the calculation of the asset management plan amounts or targets. So from that perspective, that is correct. With respect to our current capital plan, as included in the package, there are specific projects that we have undertaken, as an example, our diking projects, that are designed specifically to allow us to improve our climate adaptation and mitigation. And we will continue to pursue projects of that nature. I think the gap would be we probably don't have a really good handle on the totality of what all climate change projects might look like if you stretch that out over 20 or 30 years. So that's the portion that's not been included in the asset management. Certainly a portion of those items that we can identify right now that we consider appropriate, we have attempted to include. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Just to add a finer point to what Mr. Russell is saying, the commentary about not including climate change items in the asset management, that's the asset managed component specifically. That is no way stating that the district is not investing in climate adaptation and mitigation. There is actually a significant amount of investment in climate change and adaptation and mitigation, and it is in the capital plan.
Okay, so just to summarize for me, basically the climate change mitigation is rolled into individual projects is effectively what you're saying, right?
That's correct, as identified.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Mr. Russell, I wonder whether you may be able to confirm for me whether there may be a typo on a particular item, and I'll name it. It's 966-00102, the wastewater treatment plant upsizing for future growth. And that's a $4.5 million project for 2024. However, in the project description, and I'll quote from it, complete design in 2021, in construction 2021/22. May I just confirm that that is a typo, or are we talking about an ongoing conversation that's extended over a few years over this matter?
We're debating who gets to take this one. Through the chair, that's a typo. Clearly, the project is still underway, and we anticipate it'll be completed in 2024. As with a number of projects of this nature, they're more involved and take longer than one anticipates when they first put the project forward, and that's on our end for not spotting those dates and adjusting them accordingly.
That's fine. I recall that Mr. Rolston, a couple of years ago, probably after we had our last council endorsed the stormwater management plan, engineering department returned to present to council a scenario for Loggers Lane East drainage issues. And I believe it was one of the concepts put forward post stormwater management plan was actually a diversion of Finch Creek. And Finch Creek is something that has many man-made changes over the years. This particular project, Loggers Lane East diversion pipe, does that refer to the same scenario that Mr. Rolston brought forward to us, a pipe or a creek or a ditch? Because I know that some of the neighbors in the neighborhood are quite interested in this and see benefits from the solution that was put forward by your staff not too long ago.
Through the chair, yes, that is the project. There's been some minor modifications to it because of work that was undertaken during the Loggers East sub-area plan. And so there's been some revision and refinement of that project, but there still is a diversion pipe that would basically accept an overflow from Finch Creek. Once it reached a critical level where it would begin to flood properties, the water would enter into a diversion pipe. But then the project scope has been broadened somewhat to also include some stormwater infrastructure on Finch Drive, and the length of the diversion pipe has been reduced. So the total cost of that program is the same as was recommended in the Phase 2 Integrated Stormwater Management Plan, but the scope has been tailored and refined somewhat.
May I follow up, Mayor Herford, with a question from Mr. Rolson, just regarding neighborhood community engagement on this? Some of these landowners have been there for quite a while, and their properties are directly affected, and these are large properties, so there's a handful of folks. Is there opportunity for further engagement with the local public with properties adjacent to the project proposed?
Through the mayor, yes, there will be. There was some engagement that was undertaken as part of the Phase 2 Integrated Stormwater Management Plan. But once we get into the actual capital project planning, so design and construction, there would be further engagement with residents.
Thank you. Had a final question, and I'm not sure whether there may be opportunity for some brief comments following. But the other question concerns an item titled Smoke Bluffs Park and Community Park Trail and Signage Upgrades. It caught my attention because there's reference to a route from the Blind Channel to the Burgers and Fries climbing area feature. Now, this happens to overlap with long-standing trail safety issues, not for climbers or for the park, but going further back for residents and regular trail users. And this is a trail issue. How do folks get up and down that steep slope from the channel or down to going to schools or shopping? And people are getting hurt. And seniors won't or can't use that trail, that Valley Cliff Trail. So I just wanted to get a little bit of better background, and if you may be able to supply the information later, either planning or engineering department who may be involved, whether this project proposal relates to addressing that safe, convenient pedestrian trail issue for Valley Cliff and Hospital Hill, an overlap with the Valley Cliff Trail as a commuter trail and the upgrades needed at that steep section.
Through the chair, if I could ask, I believe Elaine Nasby is on the line and perhaps Stuart Gunn as well.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Through Mayor Herford, the item that Councillor Anderson has brought up, that trail safety is actually addressed through a separate process. It's through active transportation improvements related to the Kingswood Red Bridge development. And so funds were secured during the rezoning process to ensure that this item is addressed prior to occupancy of certain units. And staff will be bringing forward an active transportation discussion related to this to council in the fall. So that's that. I wanted to, while I have the mic, I just wanted to mention an item related to the beach groomer at Squamish Feather Park. It also relates to removing driftwood on the beach. With the waterfront beach in Squamish being a hot commodity, there will be a lot of driftwood accumulation with the adjacent log sort and logs coming down the Squamish River. And so that's also what the beach groomer relates to. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Councillor Pettingill, and I put myself on the list.
Yeah, thanks. I had a question about the proposed Brennan Park signage, and I understand some of the rationale for digital signage, but also, and I can't remember where I was just reading it, but a lot of concerns about a bright digital signage and so on. And so I just, maybe this is more of a comment, want to be cautious that we're being thoughtful about what we mean or what we're thinking of in a digital signage and what the impacts of that might be. I guess, does staff know, like, as currently conceived, is it one of those bright digital TV style signs? Is that what's conceived?
Through the chair, I think that project still sits a couple years out. We need to replace the current sign, and we don't have exact details on what that sign looks like. We would certainly be understanding of the neighbors living in the area.
Okay, thank you. And then the other one, I recall in the last go around, I think there was a couple mentions of HVACs, and I had concerns about, which ones weren't gas powered. And my recollection was that there's one or two maybe that for various reasons we just didn't have a choice. But I see three or four in this current capital plan. and Fortis's name is mentioned, which gives me great concern. So I'm just wondering if staff can speak to which of these are gas and which are strictly electric.
Through the chair, it's Cal Bragg here. Are you referring to those ones at Brennan Park? Is that correct specifically?
I think there's mention of two, or a pool and an HVAC, like a pool heater and an HVAC at Brennan Park. There's an HVAC at the Adventure Center mentioned, and then there's an HVAC mentioned at Activity 55.
Through the chair, it's complicated, and working top down, we're trying to electrify where we can. And simply, if we have a relatively new gas system that's not due to be replaced for a while, it's not ideal to replace it to electric right now. It's better to actually let it sort of work its lifespan. And a good indication of that, or a good case in point, is the pool system at Brennan Park has got some gas elements to it, and it's relatively new in the scheme of things. So there's no point in changing it over from a feasibility or a numbers point. So it's complicated. Each project has got its own virtues. And the other thing that we're focused on here is that we're trying to get the overall sustainability numbers in check here for Brennan Park. So there's some balances involved in that one as well. So it's mainly as we head down to the electrification, when we get there, there's a lot of pros and cons in between.
Okay, maybe just take this as a comment. I guess I'm not sold on all of these quite yet. I'd like some more details. And the report mentions sort of the impact relative to what we have now, but it doesn't speak about the GHG and cost impact relative to electric. And that's something that might give me some other comfort. But there's also, in the back of my mind, we are really pushing developers hard for no gas covenants. And, part of it isn't just the GHG emissions, it's moving away from that long-term dependence and sending a signal that, we do not want to have that dependence on fossil fuel infrastructure. So I'm not sure if this is something that maybe it's better to tackle as part of procurement policy or where that lives, but I guess I'll just flag that I have some concerns about some of these. I guess I'm not quite convinced that we couldn't go a little more electric, but I'll leave that for now as a comment.
Thank you for that. I've got a couple questions here. The item around the RCMP exhibits tent made me sort of triggered something for me, and that was the temporary fire hall, the temporary structure we've been using for the fire hall. Where is that, and is that something that could be used for this purpose, or do we have other pieces for it? I think it was quite obvious that we used it for Fire Hall 1, we're using Fire Hall 2, but where next, and can that play into any of this, or is that already being considered?
Through the chair, it's a good question. The answer is yes. It's got a long lifespan ahead of it. It's in very good condition. We've been talking to Squamish Rescue, and they've had a priority on it as well, and we are yet to resolve that. We've got to make that decision over the next 6 months. So everything is on the table right now.
Okay, so search and rescue is interested in that structure?
Correct.
Okay. Well, I assumed that it hadn't gone missing in all the pieces, but I just wanted to make sure that we're leveraging that appropriately. If moving on to the Laurelwood project, we heard earlier about the funding challenge. I think I understand where that is, and funding, which is obviously a huge piece of this, is there's other pieces. I know the downtown entrance study falls into this, or the design. Where are there other pieces that need to be done sort of in order of operation? Because I know that just moving the Laurelwood Bridge ahead doesn't actually get us there. So what are we looking at in that overall process? And I don't think that we've really had that backgrounder.
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you. It is interrelated. All those three projects are interrelated. The downtown Laurelwood and the new one that was identified, Loggers Lane, R11 or R18, I'm not sure. They're all interrelated. We're very much at the beginning of the planning process, so we haven't fully exactly understand how which one has to come first or how they all interrelate. But certainly the downtown entrance is the priority as far as being the first of them. How the Laurelwood connects with the Loggers Lane is still kind of in the planning stages, like I said. So certainly in the plan, you'll see downtown entrance to Pemberton done first, and then the Laurelwood Bridge after that. And the Loggers, the second part of the Loggers is still kind of in process as far as timing.
So I'm trying to find the exact timing of the downtown entrance, but I recall that being a little bit further out. But your comments make me believe that there's sort of some work underway. So how do we get to that point where we can take on that big piece of work? And is that and what are the obstacles to moving it forward if that was something that council wanted to consider? Or is it as fast as practically possible is what we're seeing in front of us?
Yeah, sorry, I don't think I understand the question as far as order or as far as.
I think timing. I know that this project's a huge undertaking, and is what we're seeing in front of us as fast as practically possible, and even a bit aspirational. We've heard the funding gap, or so like work's underway. We're just not quite ready to take on those bigger pieces of it, and it will ramp up over time. Or is this? So I'm just trying to understand how movable that is. I understand the financial constraints, but the other pieces I don't quite get yet.
Yeah, so there's two kind of pieces, I think, to that question. So in the financial plan, we've identified the design stages and we've identified the construction, or at least as far as budgetary wise. So for example, the next 2 years, 24 and 25, we're planning on doing design for the downtown entrance, followed by construction. Similarly for the Laurelwood, what you'll see in the plan is you'll see that the kind of design money is up front, and then you'll see the start of the construction for the Laurelwood. So again, we'll be really digging into that next year as part of the money we've set aside for design for the downtown entrance, and that will again correspond into the timing for the Laurelwood. Initially, the Laurelwood Bridge, there was traffic modeling done and forecasting as far as something called level of service. So how we want downtown traffic to operate. And that was, that modeling identified as, I believe, 2030 as kind of the longest we want to delay that project as far as implement it. So again, you'll see the design is, I think, for Laurelwood 26, 27, that range, and then we start getting into construction after that, intending to meet that 2030 date. But as far as if that changes or not, obviously the budget aside is when we get into design, we'll redo that modeling, see if our growth forecast for the traffic and how everything's handling downtown and how, for example, Oceanfront fits into that. We'll redo that, make sure our traffic modeling assumptions are still correct. And then the timing may change a little bit based on that analysis. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you, and it gives me some comfort that that this work is underway and that those steps are happening in sort of as quickly as practical.
100%.
But I think there's a lot of interest in this, not just around this table. So, okay, thank you, Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. I'm looking at. I was looking at till my screen jumped. The Brennan Park revitalization project. So there's two items, 845001110 and 120 that are listed. We're totaling about 26 million over the next 3 years. Do I understand correctly that that's the estimate of the cost of the full Brennan Park revitalization over the next, and to be spent over the next 3 years, with approximately 20 million of that coming from grants? Do I understand that correctly?
Cal Bragg is on the line. Hopefully he can give us a hand with this one.
I can, through the chair. Sorry, I was waiting for Roland maybe to step in on that one. I do apologize. That is correct, yes.
All right. So over the last, over my short time here, I've seen quite a lot of, say, budget estimates be a little bit on the low side for construction projects, and particularly right as we are ready to put shovels in the ground or just after we've put shovels in the ground, budget estimates change considerably. How comfortable are we with this budget estimate? And if it balloons to 30 million, 35 million, 38 million, who's responsible for carrying that additional cost? Is it us or the grant?
Through the chair, it's a good question. The grant process reduces the scope, but leaves the number the same rather than keeping the scope and increasing the budget. So we're actually under some tight controls here within the grant parameters. So for example, if costs are coming over, we're going to have to take some of the scope out, but the actual amount remains the same.
And in previous conversations and in a conversation this afternoon about the Public Works building, we talked about different classes of estimates. Could you remind me what the different classes of estimates are and what level this estimate is?
Through the chair, the grant process, when we apply, it's a Class D, excuse me, and then we add on a 30% contingency to allow for moving through from Class D to Class A. And then that's a standard rule when you apply for grants. So we're at Class D with a 30% contingency.
So I'm just going to express concern on this project right now. We saw the costs of the Public Works facility balloon way past 30% from Class D to even Class B estimates. And so I'm concerned that we're going to have a significant shortfall on this project. So I don't know what we can do to make sure we get all of our T's crossed and I's dotted before we put shovels in the ground, or we're not putting shovels in the ground in Brennan Park before we start tearing it apart. But I just want to express concern that I think we may be underestimating this.
Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
I just want to get some clarification. Mr. Bragg, you mentioned that we are limited. The grant funding will increase. We have to decrease scope. Would it be another option for us to put in our own funding and maintain the scope, or just the nature of the grant structure is that isn't an option?
Through the chair, there is an option for us to put our own funding in, correct? And there's also options for us to layer additional grants depending on the grant because they change slightly. But this is an ongoing process. We've jumped into the pool to start Brennan Park, and it's an ongoing process to fund this one. So we're also looking at other grants as well. But to answer your question specifically, yes, we can add our own funds here to keep the scope.
Okay, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. A few questions on some specific items. So in our current capital plan, there is a line item for brine storage tanks. But back in the 2022 budget, we had a 40,000 allocation to brine storage tanks. So I'm just curious if these are an early replacement or if they're additional in some way, shape, or form. If somebody can just let me know how those differ.
I can take that one. Those brine tanks were not actually purchased. So they're being delayed until the new Public Works facility is built because we didn't want to have a place to store them and have to move them twice. So these are the same ones.
Okay, and so would $40,000 of that cost be coming from that specific reserve? And so the 85 that's in here is the balance thereof, or is the cost just escalated and that 40,000 is in our general surplus reserve and we're taxing for it again?
The $40,000 is already set aside, so we will not be taxing for it again. The $85,000 is additional cost, and that will be funded from the capital reserve, if I'm correct.
Okay, and then a few on some specific fleet items. There's an addition of an active transportation trail sidewalk sweeper. I know in the past when we've added vehicles like this, it has typically come with an addition of an FTE. So I'm just curious if this is a replacement vehicle or if it's a new vehicle, and if it's new, will it require more staff?
I'll take that one. Yes, it is a new vehicle, and there will be an FTE that will be required when that equipment arrives.
So this will lead into my next question, but the sense that I got is for a while there, we were doing kind of a business case analysis for new additional vehicles like this to fully understand the impact on the operations and maintenance. Is that something that we're still doing in practice, or are we rolling that into a broader kind of financial planning process as opposed to doing it on an individual by individual basis?
Sorry, through the chair, I'll have to defer to somebody else on that one.
I think we have Ms. Boxford.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for the question. So we are now doing the business case, so to speak, on a broader, so not individualizing anymore. We're looking more at the strategic plans and building out from there. And then also with our new software, we're able to actually layer on any new, when we have certain capital or fleet, we also have the ability to layer right in there the operating costs that are associated with that. So improvements in that respect.
Yeah. Okay. So that's helpful to me, and I think it's a good direction to be going. I'm just curious, as at this table, when do we see the cumulative impact of that capital addition plus the operations and maintenance to understand the actual impact on the budget?
Through the chair. So they're coming in different parts. So the way we have our financial planning process is that we'll have the service level changes, and then the operating comes at a later date as well. So there is always the opportunity to circle back on the capital. That's why we introduce it now, and then we bring it back after council has seen the full package.
Okay, thanks for that. And then just notice that the other change this year is an additional $50,000 for the municipal and library kind of contingency budget for annual upgrades as necessary. That was previously at $50,000. And I just noticed that in the last quarterly report for 2023, we actually didn't spend out our $50,000 budget that was allocated. And so I'm just curious why we're proposing an increase to $100,000 if we haven't been spending out our previous budgets.
Through the chair, I hope that Mr. Bragg is on the line still and can sit down. Oh, sorry.
Hi, sorry, I'm there, but
We
I had a
just
little
needed to-
technical item there. Can you repeat
Mr.
the
Bragg.
question again? It just it went silent for a minute.
It's okay, Mr. Bragg. We have a volunteer in the room here, so I think you may be off the hook for the first part of this.
Through the chair. So the municipal hall and library are now combined together for rooftop replacements. So the library also has very aging infrastructure, and we're looking at replacing some of those rooftop units as well as the municipal hall wants to. So that's why we increased it this year, so we could have a budget to spend on emergency repairs and also design.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner.
I'm just looking in our 2022 budget, and it's listed as municipal hall and library improvements for facilities at 50,000. So I don't know if it's just that the scope of the anticipated upgrades for this year are bigger than they were last year.
Through the chair, So we're also now looking at more of a strategic approach to the library. So we're coming up with an HVAC design, not just emergency replacements here at Municipal Hall. So some of those costs are going to be associated with just the design for the HVAC system at the library, and then emergency repair here at Municipal Hall. So that's why we increased it.
Ms. Glende?
Can I ask Mr. White, could you introduce yourself? I'm not sure if you've presented in front of council yet.
Thank you, Ms. Glende. My name is Kyle White. I'm the new facility manager, the new Camilla. So my office is right next to Devin's at Brennan Park. And I'm currently up on the roof making all the noise, so my apologies.
Thank you for joining us and keeping us everything running here. Big shoes to fill. Are you good for now, Councillor Stoner? Anyone else with questions? Okay, well, we have a staff recommendation before us. If we're at that point. Councillor Anderson?
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Pettingill? Okay, would you like to speak to it, Councillor Anderson?
I would, thank you. This is an opportunity not only to talk and to learn about budget making, but it's also an opportunity to discuss work plans. And so it's an opportunity I look forward to each year, and I learn each year. And the quality of the presentations seem to, and our systems behind it, and these are being explained to us, it seemed to get better and better over time, it seems to me. I'd like to comment on a couple of the projects briefly. The Brennan Park concession stand changing room / Parks Admin, which is the upper floor of that building, and the Brennan Park signage. I'll bolt these together. I'll comment on them. In my files at home, I came up with a file from 1970s, it's a stamp on the envelope, and it's the plans for that building. My dad built it. And together with the husband of a councillor at the time, John McCowchuk, his wife Alice was a councillor, or alderman, as we said during the day. They got materials, the concrete, the plumbing, the lumber, all donated for that building from wood fiber and other local businesses. The Brennan Park signage, I remember the day, I was a newspaper boy, and I remember that the big headline was that Rainier came by with a check for that signage at the front of the building. That was about 1979. And some 5-figure check, something like that. My point is that we have in our community then and still today, heavy lifters, large companies. We have volunteers, would-be volunteers, and would-be in-kind contributions. And it struck me as I listened to Heather Boxford elaborate on our guiding principles for this budget, that maybe there's a place where we should leave a space in our planning for these community contributions. At that time, and maybe still today, there might be a place for the community or for the council or the district to lead in community fundraising for some of these projects. Other communities do this, and maybe we've forgotten about that possibility. We have waited 53 years to replace that change room. The soccer community, our youth of the community, have waited 53 years, who still haven't replaced it. And so maybe there's a category of projects where this can come into play, and maybe we should consider this more often. Another project, Mayor Herford, I'll just briefly comment on, and that is the major public art piece. I would like to see in future a fuller treatment of the project justification and benefits. In fact, there is no description of either justification or benefits. And it leaves me curious, are we talking about culture, or are we talking about reconciliation, or both? And I would have a number of questions about what we're doing here and on that project, a major project as it is described. So I just ask for that. Council has not had the opportunity to address this project at all to this day. or it's been mentioned as a concept, but we haven't discussed it. So I would like to see on that a fuller treatment of the justification and benefits for discussion purposes. And I did welcome much of the explanations given today, like on the beach machinery at the oceanfront beach. I do appreciate that. It's one of the benefits of our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, just a few things. Really appreciating the changes and improvements in process and information. Quite excited about the asset management and where that's taking us. Like some of my colleagues, I'm glad to see us moving to that. It was, when I joined council as well, surprising that that sort of thing wasn't done coming from a condo board. And I know the scale is completely different, but I was sort of anticipating that sort of thing. And so really glad we're moving that way. As noted, I still have some discomfort with the HVAC piece of this, and so some understanding of whether I should look to procurement policy or just a bit better justification of where we are, or do we need to rethink where that line is for electric versus accepting gas. So just, reflag that. And maybe that ties in a bit to my colleague's question about, community funding things, which I think takes us to the sponsorship policy. And I can't remember where that lies, but that piece is probably critical to, entertaining some of these donations or whatever they may be, sponsorship items. So maybe that's something for us to consider. The one thing I wanted to pick up on too, there's some comments about the increased cost of electric vehicles. It's still my maybe overly optimistic hope, but these vehicles do seem to be simpler. And I think the anticipation is still that over time, the cost will start to become cheaper than current internal combustion vehicles. So I'm holding out hope that maybe by the end of our term, we'll see the cost going down, and, people want their profits. So maybe that's being a bit overly optimistic. Hopefully we'll see a reversal there in the next few years. Overall, I guess there's a lot to digest here. It's early days, so I'm very comfortable where we are right now. Appreciate all of staff's work, but I think may have to have a second look and really dig down as we see some of the other details for our budget. But thank you for all the work.
Thank you for that, Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. Thanks to staff for the presentation, all the work that went into getting us here. This is the first look at the details of the 2024-2028 budget. And I will tentatively support the motion on the floor because it is just leading this piece into the draft overall budget. I'm still having a really hard time trying to figure out, I know I've been through this many times, so we're at the start where it's uncomfortable because you don't actually know what the implications are of the things that are in this draft budget and the things that we're weighing. And it really does weigh on me where we are at cumulatively between staff, council, and our community in terms of our risk tolerance levels and what the total budget envelope is that we're looking at. When I weigh some of the projects that are in this capital plan, I understand it has to go across all of the district and all of our different programs, but we're looking at creating a new access road to the BMX sites, but we're postponing some other things that I actually think where engineering have already done the hard work on doing a deep dive on prioritizing some of those things. We haven't gotten to other components or departments of the district. And so I'm not sure we're adequately weighing those pieces in the overall budget. That's my main concern where I sit right now. So I am fine with moving this particular component into the draft budget, but I will still be taking a really hard look at it when it comes together as a whole to understand where those final priorities are sitting, what the relative impacts are going to be on taxation. And so, yeah, thank you for the insights and the information for now, and look forward to more in-depth conversations about the total budget in the fall. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. This is obviously a huge amount of work to put together these detailed budgets, particularly as we look forward into 5 years. I completely understand the challenges and difficulties of projecting expenditures 5 years from now. I have difficulty doing that as a household, yet alone as an entire community. One thing that struck me, this is my first time going through this process, is the really, really big difference in scope and scale of all of the projects on this list. We've got projects from 6.5 line items from 6,500 to 21 million. I think that we can maybe do a better job. I think we might, as a council, we might be able to somehow split our discussion so that we can talk about big ticket items, because the fluctuation in a $20 million project is going to easily dwarf the beach groomer, right? And when we combine all these things in one conversation, I think that we may get too far into the weeds and lose the big picture on these big projects where our time spent planning and committing to projects can save us vast sums of money to pay many, many beach groomers. Anyways, that's my thought. That's on the larger scope. I'm hoping we can keep focus on these big projects and spend our time and energy making sure we do those properly. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? No. I'd just like to thank staff for all the work and across the, this is one of the calls where we have the most folks on the line, and everyone's sort of listening intently, waiting to hear something that comes into their their area of expertise and responsibility. So I really appreciate all that work, and throughout the conversation today, we've heard lots of rationale around all of these pieces, and frankly, I think they've been very well thought out. I think when they fit into the bigger pieces, as we all these things click together, I think there's still some hard choices to make, and and I think so. I'm looking forward to seeing that next piece. But I think we've got a good foundation here. My questions around the Laurelwood Bridge. I think there's hunger in the community to have that, to see that project move forward, and the answers today give me confidence that we're moving as quickly as practical on that piece. The paving plan, coming into this year's budget, with all the cost escalations, our paving master plan had committed us to a certain dollar figure rather than meters of road paved or anything else. And I thought that was what we were going to be wrestling with, because I'm willing to bet there's been escalation there, and to see the deferral gave me a bit of pause. But I'm happy to hear that there's sort of a looking at that plan in this time. But that's something I'm going to be watching closely, and paying attention to the conditions of the roads as we move around the community in the in-between. So seeing no other comments, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Oh, and I have one point of interest while we're here. Councillor Anderson, you pulled up I just got some confirmation about a recollection here. So Councillor Anderson pulled up the plans for the change room, washroom facility. And my mother lived in the apartment above that, 1972, 73. So there's a bit of history in that little building. Anyways, moving on to down the line here. Next, we have some items we're on to item 4A, which is bylaws for adoption. We don't have any presentation, but we do have, if there are any questions, we'll have staff available to answer. We're on to adoption. So the first one is the District of Squamish housing agreement for Garibaldi Springs Phase 2, the non-market rental. Is that moved by Councillor Hamilton, second by Councillor French? Any comments? Call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next, we have this District of Squamish housing agreement, Garibaldi Springs Phase 1 for the non-market rental. Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Stoner. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next, we have item 5, which is a public hearing date correction. And so I think that was only last week, was it? The last meeting, we set a bunch of public hearings for October 3rd, and we're looking to reschedule those to September 12th, as there was time in the schedule. Mr. Daly, did you want to speak to this at all?
I'm just here to answer any questions if necessary. Staff just thought it would be more reasonable to do it on a special business meeting rather than a regular business meeting, given the length of time all of the bylaws will take.
Thank you. Yes. As it wasn't until agenda planning where it really occurred to me exactly how many public hearings we're putting in one spot. And it was, so we've created a special spot for that on the 12th, as it's not quite practical to take on another meeting. So do we have to do the individual motions for this? Councillor Stoner, are you asking a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. This is actually just a question on the Section D component, which I think Council had a number of questions on. And I'm just curious, if we move up the public hearing to September 12th, that staff feel confident that they'll be able to address the issues that Council had raised during that particular conversation. And just to be fully transparent, I am actually reflecting back on the motion and considering bringing it back for reconsideration and just sending it back to staff with first reading, as opposed to bringing it back for public hearing. Because I do think that there were a number of issues, and I have concerns that if staff are confident that they can bring that back for September 12th, that actually may not address the issues that were raised at this council table in a manner that will be fulsome enough to inform the public hearing, and then we might just have to do it all over again. So my concern is, if we move that up, that we won't give staff enough time to really address the issues that were identified during that discussion.
I think that is a reasonable point. Staff would do their best to address the comments provided by council by September 12th, but as you noted, there were a number of concerns. So staff will do their best to address them to council's requests by that date.
Go ahead, Ms. Arthurs.
Thank you, Mayor. Robin Arthurs, General Manager, Corporate Services. To the point, it's better to set the public hearing now, given the August break, because we can always cancel the hearing for that one particular bylaw, the technical amendments, and reset it afterwards.
Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, and then just reflecting a little bit further, if there are changes that staff need to make to the bylaw as they address those questions, they would just then cancel that public hearing and then they'd bring it back for second reading. Is that correct?
Okay, thank you. So let's start with section A, and if when we get to section D, something else needs to happen, we'll deal with it there. We'll just go in order. So essentially, these are just moving the public hearing dates, and they're there. Do I need to go to corporate officer? I need to read these all out, or is that?
You could read one for posterity.
I'll read. Okay, so under section A this all falls under the 2023 zoning bylaw update, and is for revised public hearing date. So under section A is titled "Include Property-Specific Density Bonus Schemes to Incentivize Affordable Rental and Market Rental Housing." That the public hearing for the District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200/2011 amendment bylaw 39773 and 39775 Government Road number 2980/2023 be rescheduled from October 3rd, 2023 at 6 p.m. to September 12th, 2023 at 6 p.m. at the District of Squamish, with limited in-person participation from council chambers and electronically via WebEx, and subject to public health order to the contrary. And that is essentially what the motion is for all of the pieces all the way through. Councillor French? Thank you. And we're doing these individually, Ms. Arthurs? Okay, so this is the first one for the government road, moved by Councillor French and seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any comments? No, we'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. So next up, the same content, and this relates to 3018 The Crescent. Moved by Councillor Stoner, second by Councillor Hamilton. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next one is for, again, similar or same date adjustment for 38171 and 38185 Westway Avenue. Moved by Councillor Hamilton, second by Councillor French. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And next is section B, line zoning on properties with environmentally sensitive areas and steep slopes with the OCP OCP policy. And this again is just the date changed as discussed previously, and this is for 1901 Maple Drive and 40782 Perth Drive. Is that moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Anderson? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We're on to section C, and these are property-specific technical amendments. And again, this is the date change only from October 3rd to September 12th. The first one is regarding P2 amendments. Moved by Councillor Stoner, second by Councillor Hamilton. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. The next, again, strictly date change is relates to the Brackendale Art Gallery. Moved by Councillor Stoner, second by Councillor Hamilton. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. The next, again, strictly a date change is Unit B, 1005 Industrial Way. Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Hamilton. Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Again, date change only. This is for 41668 and 41678 Finn Road. Moved by Councillor Hamilton, second by Councillor French. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Oh. And next, again, strictly a date change. This is for 2595 Malcolm Road. And I'll move by Councillor Stoner. I'll second that. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next, again, strictly date change, as with all of these, pertains to 1701 Centennial Way. Moved by Councillor French and second by Councillor Hamilton. All in favor? Motion carries. And the last piece in this section, again, strictly a date change, is for the UC1 amendments at the university, moved by Councillor French, and I'll second that. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Motion carries. Thank you. We're on to section D, which is the technical amendments. We discussed these a little bit earlier. I'd be looking for a mover at this point. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Is it possible at this point to bring this back for reconsideration?
To bring the bylaw itself back for reconsideration, we would probably have to recess and prepare, get the bylaw in front of us and the report and everything.
Councillor Stoner, with your earlier comments, made me think about perhaps this this one could live at that future date at this point, and we don't need to make that change. I don't know if that goes far enough to satisfy your concerns, or if that date's still practical. But just an option is leaving it where it is, and would give time if we needed to do any reconsideration or anything else with this. There creates a bit of space for staff work, for council's mind, and I'd be supportive of that for at this point, and we can discuss further if anything else needs to happen. If anyone feels differently, you're welcome to. We do have a motion recommendation before us, but we have moved also a lot of work out of that day on on the 3rd. So perhaps this could be appropriate there. Councillor French?
Mayor, I'm just wondering if this is maybe a good opportunity to ask staff if there are any concerns with that direction.
I don't have any concerns with that. I think it's reasonable, given that all the rest of the bylaws were moved ahead. So I think that would be appropriate.
Okay. So if I see some nodding heads, so we'll just leave it where it is. We don't need to vote on that. We've already made that recommendation. So, Councillor Penigo.
Just some clarity. We had some various discussion on this bylaw, but I don't think we had a resolution on what specific things we wanted changed. Are we comfortable just leaving that with staff to kind of, if we're thinking there may be some alterations on this between now and the 3rd?
Maybe Mr. Daly would like to comment.
I think staff has detailed notes and are prepared to attempt to address the comments that were noted during the meeting. And then should council not feel that those are addressed, they don't have to proceed with giving the bylaw any further readings or could refer it back to staff on that date in October.
Okay, so everyone understands where we are there? Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving on. The new item 6, which is the, and thank you for supporting the, thank you for supporting the amended agenda. Council, I'm following up on an item that we've discussed previously here a couple times. I believe the first time was early June, and this is around the Gender Safety Advisory Committee invitation letter. And we've asked for details, and we got those, and we asked for some more details. So at the end of June, on the 20th, we discussed it, and council directed me to reach out to WLNG to get the terms of reference for this group. And I did that, and it took quite some time, but I received finally a follow-up late last week, and I wanted to share that with council, and it was too late to get it on the agenda officially, but essentially the terms of reference for that group are under development and in draft, and are being developed by that group itself. So that's where the terms of reference sit. So I know that was a question, that was an outstanding question. So I thought it was appropriate, given that we're going into the break in August, that we have a discussion around this piece and given its current status, and see if we're comfortable making a decision at this point, if we want to let that play out so they have their terms of reference before we decide what we'd like to do with it. But I felt that was a decision for the group, so I wanted to bring it forward at this point. So we do not have the terms of reference, although the group does have is developing those, and I'm unclear as to how much room they have to work with them. But it was communicated to me that it wasn't appropriate to share those in draft form. So this is where we are. So the question, I think, is two parts. One is, well, it could only be one part. Do we want to appoint someone to participate in this as per the invitation? And then secondly would be who. If the first question is no, then we don't need the second question. So I'd like to break it into the two pieces. So with the information we have today, I'm open to having this conversation here, and we can defer to a later date as well. But we do have a month off, so I wanted to make sure that if there was work to happen in that time between, that we didn't miss that opportunity, if that's what it was. So, questions, thoughts, Councillor Stoner?
Just some thoughts, not a question. I do think it's a chicken and egg. If there's no terms of reference, it's hard to know exactly what we're signing up for. The other side of that coin is that we can always pull out if it's not actually finding that it's serving us, or we're not having any sort of meaningful impact by being involved in those conversations. And I think being involved earlier is better to understand how those are getting, how that table is coming together, how those terms of reference are coming to be. And so I do think it's probably worth considering that we send somebody from council at least to a meeting or two to better understand what's going on.
Thank you for that. Other thoughts on this? Councillor Pettingill?
I'm supportive of that, but I think, as I've thought about this, it is good to know what's going on. But I think given some of the things we see from the EAO office and the discussion back and forth, it would be worthwhile writing a letter to Wood Fiber and the EAO being very clear about our participation, some of our concerns about we are just there as an observer. And so the fact that this is a wood fiber only and we're still dealing with these common issues and just sort of make very clear the framing so it's not presented later to the EAO as Squamish is part of this committee and just make it very clear from the start for everyone's perspective about what our involvement is.
Yeah, thank you. I the role is as observer, and I think that yeah, I think that's important. I also think that perhaps we have a bit of time on that. I don't want to get into that particular piece of it in this meeting, and having if we decide to appoint someone, whoever that is, reports back and keeps us and so we can support them in their efforts to relay the point of view of this group, and of course, and communicate it out to Fortis, EAO, and all points beyond. But that's the kind of thing we could do by participating. I think we'd have more leverage there, would be my piece as well. So other thoughts on this? Councillor Anderson. Oh, sorry. Councillor Greenlaw, you had your hand first, then Councillor Anderson.
Thanks. Yeah. I think it's a really important conversation, and I think we should do what we can to encourage conversations like this happening. And I think it's important for us to keep up to date with what's being discussed in this group and what's being addressed in these meetings. So yeah, I think we should partake. Yep.
Okay. Councillor Anderson.
During our protocol signing event with the Squamish Nation Council last week at Totem Hall, I happened to be part of a conversation with in the Elders Lounge with Gwen Harry. Gwen Harry, as you may know, has been volunteered to serve on this committee, and she was very clear that she views this opportunity as a very valuable and welcome gesture on Wood Fiber's part, and she does definitely take the role very seriously. And while she didn't comment on the district's participation, I'm sure that she would encourage our participation. I don't, Mayor Herford, have further thoughts on how or who might be selected if we take that further step, but I just wanted to pass on that from the Squamish Nation Community Elders conversation. They're very much on board for this initiative. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any other comments? Councillor French, then Hamilton.
Thanks, Mayor. I like the idea of taking any opportunity we can to collaborate, or increase our cooperation and collaboration with both the Wood Fiber project and the Fortis BC project. And consistent with our recent commitment to learn from the Squamish, I think it would be a great idea to listen to what Ma has to say. Ma being Gwen Harry.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks. The first time this came, or the last time we spoke about this, I expressed reservations that this committee, the biggest risk here, I believe, is that this committee is taking an extremely important issue, and Wood Fiber is using this committee as a window dressing to appear as if they are attempting to address a very, very important issue in our community. My concern about delaying or starting to participate in the committee before seeing a terms of reference is that the terms of reference are really where the authority on that committee becomes enshrined. And if this committee doesn't have any authority, then my fear is that it will simply be window dressing. And I do not want to see that happen. I am absolutely supportive of the steps that Woodfibre is taking, and I sincerely hope that they are looking towards meaningful change. I am concerned that they have not put together a terms of reference yet for this very important committee. So I do support us beginning to participate, but I am reserved in that it may be a window dressing on a very important issue.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hamilton. I think you raised some very important points, and I think I think there's alignment here. We're all very concerned about this piece, and I think the lack of terms of reference sort of cuts both ways, where there's an opportunity to be at the table while that's being discussed to understand, and also yeah. But it also would be great to have that defined and make sure that this group has some recommendations, have some teeth. So, go ahead, Councillor Greenlaw.
Well, I don't know that I'm not that concerned about the lack of terms and references because we're only being invited to be observers. So in my opinion, it's fairly low risk and there isn't much commitment either way. Also, I do think it probably should be a woman who represents council because I think we might have more experience with these things.
Yeah, thank you. I think on the terms of reference piece, it's just whether it has teeth or not as to how much resources we want to put into it. If it's something that is performative and doesn't have some levels of accountability and thus teeth, then it may not be worth the time and energy of us to be there. But that's the risk. But we can assess that after if we've been there for a while. So I saw Councillor Stoner and then Pettingill.
I was going to put a motion on the floor, but if there's another question, I'll wait.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Just a comment, and I, agree with most of my colleagues' comments, and, can be okay with communicating the context of our engagement more formally at a later date, if that makes more sense. But I do still feel that up front, there should be some clear parameters around things like use of our logo and so on, because if this doesn't turn out to be anything more than window dressing, I don't want to lend legitimacy to something that doesn't deserve it, especially that might live on in marketing material that's hard to pull back and so on. So I think some parameters do need to be set out front. I don't necessarily want to detail those here. I think staff could probably reasonably do that, but I think that's important.
Okay, thank you. Noted. Councillor Stoner.
I was going to move that Councillor Greenlaw be appointed to the Woodfibre LNG Gender Safety Advisory Committee if she so accepts.
Yeah, sure.
Are you seconding the motion? Is that can the appointee second the motion? Councillor French, are you seconding that? Okay, there you go.
I was more affirming consent.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just was seeing how far we could push that. So second by Councillor French. Would you like to speak to this, Councillor Stoner or Councillor Greenlaw?
Well, should the motion be amended that we have a set of parameters that we're comfortable with?
I'm deferring to the mover for a second to see if she has a reply. Is there a way to have a motion?
Yeah, and I think I'll may make them in my comments. I don't want to add to staff workload. I think that this is just an email response from the mayor saying this is the person who's going to show up to your meetings, and then it's council responsibility for reporting back to council on how this is going and when the terms of reference come forward, that definition of observer. And if we're not comfortable with it at that point, then we pull out is my general sense, as opposed to like going through very detailed what we think our terms of reference are or what our parameters are for participating. I think this is really just kind of a scouting mission, if I'm being honest. I do think that there is some substantial risk here. Like, this is only covering wood fiber, and we know the biggest risk with the issues of gender and sexual violence are likely going to come from Fortis, and Fortis is only participating as well as an observer. So to me, this results in a lot of questions, and I think the only way to actually get those fulsomely answered is to have somebody show up at a few of these meetings and figure out what the heck is going on. And so I think we're going to kind of have to iterate as we go, but I don't think that by sending continued emails, we're going to get an understanding from wood fiber as to what's actually going on. And so our decision is either we show up and we understand it, or we just let it go on without us. And I think from my perspective, it's important to show up, figure out what the heck is going on, and then whether it's worth our time to continue to participate. And hopefully, as the representative, Councillor Greenlaw, you can bring the terms of reference back when they're available. And we can have another more fulsome discussion amongst this council as to whether we want to continue to participate or not based on your attendance at a few meetings.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that direction.
Okay, thank you. Other comments on this before we vote? Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Just a question to staff. What is the name, if I can, what is the name of our policy that details use of our logo and so on? I believe we have a policy.
Use of district logo policy. It's also in the IT policy.
So I guess I would propose an amendment that in the response to wood fiber, we include a copy of that policy.
I think I don't know that requires that we need to tie this up into this motion. I think that as part of the acceptance, we can just. I'm happy to provide a little, and I frankly would have provided some rough framework for that as to where our boundaries are. And I think that I'm speaking in support of the motion. I'll just turn this into my comment as we get going here. That Councillor Greenlaw, we're here to support your participation in this, and you know, Councillor Pettingill's comments are about one particular piece that could happen, but as we get into it, if things are happening, we're please report to the group, and I'd also be happy individually to consult if throughout if you find that that's if that's necessary, and we'll find out and we can figure out ways collectively to support you in this work. So. But I'm happy to support, and I think that being at the table is an important place to be, and but hopefully it's worthwhile and not a marketing exercise or window dressing or however else we want to say it. And I'll leave it to you to report back to us on how you're scoring it as things go. So any other comments on this before I call the question? Councillor Hamilton, I
just don't know if it's a point of order. Councillor Pettingill, did you have an amendment that you were putting on the floor?
I'm comfortable with the mayor's comments, so I don't feel I need to put forward an amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. That's all. Okay, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And we'll communicate that out in due course. So next we have a motion to close. Moved by Councillor Stoner, second by Councillor Hamilton. All in favor? Motion carries. And we're going to recess now. And Ms. Arthur is going to tell me for how long. Are we going to be able to go here? Do you want to do this? Okay, we're going to take 10 minutes, and then if we need longer than that, we can do this after the committee of the whole, but I'd rather use the bit of bonus time now because we are dictated to when we start the committee of the whole, which is at 2 o'clock, which should be the same link.